Getting our live stream going. All right.
Hello.
Good evening, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Joe Aiello, Director of Community Engagement and Organizing at the Association. We are just a quick reminder that we are going to be recording this presentation for future use. We're also live streaming on YouTube channel, so everybody be on your best behavior. Sean will be doing a Q&A along the way, so make sure we'll call on you and get you in there. Also, I'll be here in the background monitoring the chats. If there's any Q&A going on there, I'll be sure to let Sean know. With that said, Sean, so that's all you.
Thank you, Joe. And Joe is going to drop in a meeting reporting link at some point, just as a reminder for folks who are taking part in person and virtually during our week of advocacy for passenger trains. Um, we're trying to make sure we track all those meetings as they get scheduled, and so we appreciate Joe's work on that. We appreciate your work as well. Thanks everyone for joining us. We have a lot to cover tonight, and so I'll get right to it. Tonight we are going to talk about the main issues facing the Congress this year with regards to transportation passenger rail. Um, it was we are going to cover it at a high level, I think, because we will cover a lot of this again in more detail in person at Rail Passengers Association headquarters in downtown DC in a few weeks' time. But I do want to give people kind of a sense of where we are. White House dropped the presidential budget request last Friday, so there is something for us to respond to. We are that was the starting gun, I think, for the appropriations, this year's appropriation season. And so we do have something to respond to now. There we go. We did receive a request to kind of go over the congressional budgeting process, congressional budgeting 101, if you will. And so I did want to take a little bit of time to refresh people who don't, breathe and eat this world. And and also we have a few first timers, I think. So I wanted to talk about how the annual budget process works and how it does not work. Because we do face a certain degree of dysfunction in the Congress right now, and so it's important that we understand where it works and where it doesn't as we prepare for um, next our meetings later this month. So there's a two-step process that happens in the budget in federal budgeting. There's the authorization language and the authorizing bills that are passed out of Congress. They are passed out by subject matter, and congressional committees through authorizing bills establish new programs. They continue programs. They direct agency funding, and they provide programmatic guidance, programmatic funding levels for the entire government. A lot of these authorization bills are multi-year bills. And so for transportation, that's a 5-year funding structure, 5-year policy structure. But it is up to the appropriations committees in both the House and the Senate through their annual appropriations bill to implement these multi-year funding frameworks, make sure that the agencies actually get the money on a year-to-year basis, and within that framework, they can use the annual appropriations bills to kind of tweak programs, provide congressional guidance, provide feedback as they see how these programs are implemented. And so this year we will be doing both. we will be dealing with the expiration of a multi-year authorizing bill, the IIJA. And so Congress is going to be drafting the replacement legislation. We're also going to be doing annual appropriations. So within appropriations, we can break it down even further. There's the regular appropriations process, where you have 12 annual spending bills, and different committees, different subcommittees within the appropriations committee all handle this. We are concerned with the transportation, housing, and urban development bill. And so that's going to cover all the discretionary spending over roads, transit, intercity rail, freight rail, and we will also, be competing for dollars with the housing programs, rental assistance vouchers, etc. There's also continuing resolutions. That's going to be the temporary funding measures that bridge the gap when Congress is faced with a spending deadline and fails to meet it. That has been happening with increasing frequency over the last 15 years or so. And this past year, we saw, I think, the longest shutdown in modern history. So I expect that to happen again this year, us to be dealing with short-term kind of stopgap funding bill, but it's important to keep in mind as we discuss. There's also supplemental appropriations. That is the funding bills that are used to cover emergency spending needs. That can happen when there's a particularly bad hurricane season, or there was the fires that happened out in Southern California, I think 2 years ago now, year and a half ago now. Also is used. There's a lot of times there's military supplementals when there is a war that breaks out in the Middle East. We've used it for to provide military support for Ukraine, and the White House is requesting a supplemental for the military action taking place in Iran right now. So it's also, I think, worth breaking down mandatory versus discretionary spending at the federal budget level. Those are the two main categories that Congress oversees when it deals with annual budgets. Mandatory spending is going to be programs like Social Security, interest on national debt, or the Highway Trust Fund mass transit account, where it's predetermined spending. It's really not up to Congress to, on a year-to-year basis, to tweak that program. It's described through formulas. It's prescribed through formulas. And it accounts for the majority of government spending. So 72% in the last year of counting in FY fiscal year 23. Discretionary spending is a much smaller slice of the pie. It's 23% in the same year, fiscal year 2023. And it's going to be resources overseen by the Appropriations Committee within that 12 bill substructure. If we look at the subcommittee allocations, I took this graphic from the House Appropriations Committee. You can see even then, the defense spending and military construction and veterans affairs takes up the vast majority, over 60% of discretionary of the subcommittee allocations. When you look at how much of the pie transportation takes up, again, if you look at THUD, Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, we're around 5.6% in the last year. That was on display on the House Appropriations Committee. And, even within that, transportation counts for slightly less than half of THUD. So we really are kind of fighting over the margins here. But again, it's transportation is one of those powerhouse committees where I think you see a lot of near-term value in that spending, and so people do tend to gravitate towards it. Now, if you look at the projected timeline for how these annual appropriations bills are supposed to move, you can see here we're already a little bit behind the curve because the president's budget request is due in early February. By statute, it is often times delayed. We didn't get it till the very end of the very beginning of April this year. Member requests happen in February and March. That is individual members of the House of Representatives, individual senators who contact the committees to discuss, to endorse spending levels for individual programs, such as Amtrak operations, or you may say programmatically they want to support port funding because they're on a coastal district. There's also, as we have restored earmarks into the appropriations process, we are looking at deadlines for members to submit earmark requests to the committees. That is going to be April 23rd for the Senate, if my memory serves me correctly. So again, we're a little bit behind the curve, but something to keep on our radar. We would expect April, May, June to start seeing congressional oversight hearings for each of the 12 spending bills. And even within that, they'll sometimes break it out into, for instance, the THUD subcommittee might have a hearing dedicated to highway spending. Sometimes, if there is enough of a calendar to work with, we will have a rail specific THUD hearing. With this year being behind the curve, not only in the sense that we got a late start, but also we have the midterms. There's going to be a number of primaries that members have to focus on. We have a number of retirements. I think we're going to be dealing with a very compressed hearing schedule. And so we might not hear a lot about what the subcommittee chairs are thinking in advance of releasing the bills. Oftentimes, you don't hear what the top line spending levels for individual programs like Amtrak, like the federal state partnership for intercity passenger rail are going to be until late June when they have a markup. And then from there, within the markups, this is the process. This is the kind of public airing of these ideas, of these proposed spending levels, where you're going to have a public back and forth between the majority, which in this case for both the House and the Senate are Republicans, and the minority, the Democrats. It's a chance to offer amendments to a bill. It's a chance to offer proposed spending level changes and also individual policy writers to the bill. So a compressed markup schedule is generally bad for us to provide input on, for the public to provide input on these bills. But again, with the compressed timeline, I expect things to move along slowly at first and then all at once. From the markups, it is scheduled to move to floor consideration, where the full House of Representatives and the full Senate will have an opportunity to submit amendments. The degree to which they are able to offer amendments is oftentimes limited by leadership. And so again, we'll kind of see what happens this year. It has been a point of contention among the House Republican, not the Freedom Caucus, but kind of the right rump of the House GOP caucus, that there has not been as much of a opportunity for them to offer amendments, and so they have kind of been feuding with House Majority Leader Johnson over this. We'll see how it moves. You would then want to move to conference negotiations, where the House and the Senate have both passed their version of one of the 12 spending bills, and they get together and hammer out the differences, which tees up final floor consideration. And you would want all that to happen before September 30th. So that's how it's supposed to work out. That's the calendar as they've set it up. We can say, and there's a graphic provided by Bloomberg Government. They have not been achieving this timeline. They have not been executing on this timeline very well over the last, I guess we're up to 20 years now. You can see the number of continuing resolutions. They have not passed anything on time in that 20-year period. There has had to be at least a short-term kind of stopgap budget. And last year, of course, we had a full year CR. I wouldn't be shocked if we had a full year CR this year again. And I wouldn't be shocked if we had to have a bit of a shutdown before we got there. I think people are, they want to be heading into the midterm elections with a lot of time to fundraise, a lot of time to campaign, and they're not going to want to be stuck in DC for an extended period right before midterm elections, especially since that tends to hurt. A government shutdown right before a midterm will hurt the incumbent candidate and the governing party. I'll stop right there. I think there's stop sharing, see if I can get to the chat and give an opportunity for people to ask questions. So going back through the chat, Steve Newson, in asking money for long distance equipment, do we have a ballpark figure for the order, or do we have an idea of cost per single level car and the number of cars in any initial order? I'm hoping we will get an update from Amtrak in DC when we meet with them. I do know additionally that a lot of the money for that order has already been kind of identified through the advanced appropriations that were included in the IIJA. I do think there will have to be a supplemental request as part of that, but it is also possible that money could be secured through some of the remaining IIJA discretionary grants. So, we'll see. The answer is a lot of the money is already identified, but we won't know the details until the request for qualifications is made public, and it goes through that process, which unfortunately is going to take a while. Lance Hodges asked, how often is the T-HUD bill subject to a continuing resolution? Often. Sometimes, you will get what's called a minibus, where you'll have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 bills that are passed separate from the full 12 bill corpus, and that allows you to kind of move some non-controversial bills ahead of the shutdown, ahead of a CR. That tends not to include T-HUD. You will see agriculture and defense, milcon generally move in the first tranche, and then transportation tends to be part of like a second tranche, where a second tranche of in terms of how you rank non-controversial spending bills. It does kind of depend on, whether or not there are cuts identified within the T-HUD bill. If there are cuts, that's obviously going to make it harder to pass. There is a status quo bias among the Congress, and so it is difficult to do dramatic plus ups or dramatic decreases in funding. Our chairman, our chair, Meredith Richards, asked, "What are our chances for restoring the federal-state partnership funding set at zero in the Trump budget in the T-HUD budget?" That's a good question. That is a good question. I think, and I'll get to this in a little bit more detail, but I can at least kind of tackle that idea. The president proposes and the Congress disposes. That's the mnemonic device, uh, the trope that we use to kind of talk about division of powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch. So Congress is completely free to take up the president's budget and execute on it. It also it's within its power to ignore it completely. Oftentimes, a lot of this depends on whether there's alignment in who controls the White House and who controls the House and the Senate. So the fact that there is unified GOP control suggests that there's going to be a little bit more of an alignment between the White House budget and the White House budget request and what Congress ends up doing. And we certainly saw Congress fall in line last year in a way that benefited passenger rail programs in large part, but also Congress has oftentimes felt free to go its own way. And so I would hope that particularly Senate Appropriations Committee with Chair Collins leading the way, we would see some sort of continuity in funding. I do know it's going to be, if there is a big plus up for defense spending, which is, what we've seen the White House request, it's going to make it a lot harder for the other discretionary domestic spending programs. And so, I think Amtrak lucked out in a lot of ways with seeing the, only a minimal cut proposed, but it's also a bit of a savvy move by the White House because they're not slashing anything in such a way that there's going to be people running around with their hair on fire. They're just doing a very, 10% is a lot, but it's not exactly like end the national network levels of cuts. So we'll see. The other thing, of course, is as housing prices continue to rise, the fact that transportation is paired with the housing and urban development programs always means, there's a battle between those two competing priorities because they're fighting for the same pot of money. Jim Webster asked, what will be the effort and mood to take the IIJA forward? I will cover that in a future section of this presentation. Dan Bilka asked, what rail programs policies have you heard bipartisan interest in improving, expanding, better funding? Dan, are you asking about annual approps or are you asking about for a reauthorization purpose?
Reauthorization.
I will cover that in reauthorization. So I'm going to get back to the presentation and we will play from current slide. So just to look real quick at the uh, fiscal year 2027 appropriations outlook, the White House kicked off the budget process last Friday. We're looking at, if you look at the bottom line up front, they're proposing a 10% cut to non-defense discretionary spending to offset margin, almost offset. I mean, I think it still increases the deficit, but a 44% increase to defense discretionary spending, which is equivalent to an increase of 441 billion. That's a little bit above my pay grade to determine exactly how Congress is going to respond to that. I think there's going to be external factors, frankly, that have to do with, how the war between the US and Iran develops. We did see some positive news right before I jumped right before we launched this call, saying that, there's going to be a 2-week negotiation period. So that should prevent escalation for at least a little while. But if there is a shooting war that breaks out, or rather, if things do escalate, Congress might feel like its hand is being forced, and they might look to discretionary spending to offset some of that increased military spending abroad. Drilling down to the rail and transit side of part of the picture, which again, very small part, but it's the part that interests us. We saw the presidential request make a 15% cut to the Amtrak operating budget. So 200 million for the Northeast Corridor, little less, 127 million for the national network. As Meredith pointed out, they did zero out the Fed-state partnership for intercity passenger rail. I believe they zeroed that out last year as well, but the Appropriations Committee did end up finding some change in the couch cushions at around the ballpark of 65 million in FY26. So we will see what happens this year. Chrissy was doubled under the presidential budget request from 137 million to 300 million. I think a lot of that, it has to do with it being it is a reservoir for, that is the pot of money that congressional rail earmarks come out of. But also it has big support among shippers, big support among short line rail industry, because Chrissy has been used. It's an intermodal program, but under the Trump administration, it has been very much targeted at freight rail programs. We compare that to what we are requesting, which is that far right-hand column. And, we talked about it, and we figured, in the absence of authorized funding levels, because funding levels set by the IIJA expired in FY26. So this is the first out year post IIJA. We figured it's important to emphasize that continuity is important. It's important to emphasize that this is the last level that was officially endorsed by Congress. And so in the absence of a new surface transportation authorization providing that funding framework, Congress ought to continue with that last officially endorsed level. States have been ponying up their own money. Municipal governments, regional governments have been investing in the rail program. Amtrak obviously has invested a lot of its resources in taking and making sure that they can utilize the infrastructure bill funds wisely. And so we would like to see that continued. I also think it's worth emphasizing that, when we're talking about the authorized levels, that can sometime that is going to shortchange what kind of drop off we are facing in rail investment. The IIJA included advanced appropriations across the entire 5 years. It provided, a really nice, predictable, dedicated funding source um, for for rail programs, not just Amtrak, but also the discretionary grant programs, the federal state partnership. And so, as we move into that out year, Amtrak is going to see a sharp drop off in the amount of money it has to execute state of good repair programs, to, you know, renew stations, to fund procurement of new equipment. And we're also going to see a lot less money available for states that are looking to pursue expansion of service, upgrade service, and introduce service onto new corridors. Just drilling down to Amtrak alone, you can kind of see right here, and this is what Amtrak has been doing it with it in terms of actual and planned outlays using the IIJA advanced funding and some authorized funds. So you can see here, there's going to be a long tail here, but it does start to ramp down pretty quickly. And we do not want to return to starvation rations for our national operator. I'm going to stop here real quick again before I get into the kind of the legislative ask and just see if anyone has any question about the White House budget request and our budget request. Why is RPA requesting less for the national network than was enacted in 2026? We are not. Just double check. Sorry, I apologize. That's a typo. That should be reversed. The national network should be getting 3 billion, and the Northeast corridor should be getting 1.4 billion. Thank you for your sharp eyes, Lance. That is my mistake. And we will correct that. Jim Webster. Oh, and Dean also got there ahead. Jim Webster asked, will you address the threats, opportunities for core ID projects underway? Yeah, ping me once we get to the kind of the end of the presentation, Jim, and we can see if we can cover that. I'm going to start sharing my screen again. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. So our 2026 one-pagers are live, sans the FY27 Ledge Ask, which I'm still waiting for the official sign-off from my boss. And so that should be live, FY27, FY 2027 legislative grant request, which is in that lower left-hand part of the matrix. That should be live by early tomorrow morning. But we do have the 2026 economic benefits, which include a lot of updates on some of the studies that our in-plan team has been doing internally to talk about how investment in passenger rail benefits local economies and the national economy. We were also able to incorporate the Rail Supply Institute's new national survey of how the Rail Supply industry benefits the U.S. economy, how many jobs it creates, and the kind of economic impacts on both a national and a state level. We're going to hear from the Rail Supply Institute in April in person. And so I'm excited for that. It's worth checking out, and we'll link to it in that economic benefits one pager. We also include environmental benefits, which again, that's kind of targeted at progressives and lefties, but I do think there is a certain kind of resonance that might happen with that 2026 environmental benefits one pager, given the oil shock we are all experiencing. So I think you should check it out. We also include a updated FAQ for about privatization, profitability, and passenger rail. So I'm going to talk real quick about what's included in the legislative grant request one pager, talk about the surface transportation blueprint one pager, and I will not get into the IIJ benefits one pager, but it's there for you to check out. So regarding the legislative grant request, we're going to have, okay, it's correct on the table there. So I'm glad I got the numbers right, at least on that sheet. But you can see here that the funding request table, there's a little bit of narrative included kind of leading up to it. And we talk about the need to support Amtrak operations in excess of the capital funding that they have on hand, which they're still kind of working through from the IIJA. It's going to help you succinctly make the case to congressional staffers, to members of Congress you come across about what it is we're kind of rallying behind. We also outline the rail policy requests for fiscal year 27. That includes a lot of the policy extensions of a lot of policy riders we've seen passed in prior appropriations bill, such as extending the prohibition on Amtrak reducing any service using federal money, except in the case of emergency. That was introduced following the Southwest Chief Bustitution proposal that former Amtrak President Richard Anderson proposed, which Congress successfully turned back in large part thanks to a cadre of senators that we helped organize from the Midwest. It includes a sense of Congress on the importance of the long distance network, particularly to rural communities. It also includes a language that Amtrak has requested, allowing it to use fiscal year 27 federal funds as a local match for discretionary grants to the DOT. That will allow Amtrak to be a better partner for states that it is looking to partner with, so that it can bring some money to the table as it looks to, it can bring more money to the table as it looks to partner with, states and regional governments that are looking to access IIJA discretionary grants. We identified a few pieces of passenger rail legislation that we have worked with congressional offices to advance and develop, including the Rail Passenger Fairness Act, which has to do with Amtrak's civil right of action and on-time performance, and how it deals with host railroads. There's the Long Distance Corridor Relief Act, which was introduced by Senator Sheehy from Montana in partnership with the Big Sky Rail Authority. And that has to do with eliminating the corridor, the kind of I would say administrative requirements introduced by the FRA, saying that long distance, all corridors, including long distance corridors, must provide local matches to advance through the corridor ID program. And I think that's going to be, that introduces a unfair obstacle for, long distance routes that are looking to secure federal funding. And this would kind of provide a quick legislative fix for that. There's also the Passenger Rail Liability Adjustment Act of 2025, introduced by Chairman Nels, who's on his way out the door. that has to do with kind of granting flexibility to commuter railroads to allow them to secure liability coverage in a more responsive manner, and kind of eases some of the restrictions that they are facing that make it really difficult to meet the liability recover the minimum liability cap requirements. The All Aboard Act of 2025, which was introduced by Senator Markey and Representative DeLuzio, which identifies $200 billion for electrification of passenger rail, expansion of passenger rail, and introduces a formula fund program to help states develop the administrative capacity to develop rail systems within their states. We also identified the Federal-State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail Reauthorization Act, introduced by Congressman Cohen from Tennessee. He's ranking member on, well, he actually just moved on the Rail T&I subcommittee. But it just seeks to extend the Fed State Partnership Program for 5 years at $7.5 billion. And by the way, as you can see, short descriptions of all those pieces of legislation are going to be included in the one pager, so you don't have to memorize all that. We also include a very quick link to the blueprint for our reauthorization in the footer, and we're going to make sure to add a QR code so that people can easily kind of go between the two different proposals. Regarding the surface transportation one pager, and I think this gets to kind of the question that Dan was asking regarding, what kind of traction have we seen among members of Congress? This one pager is going to try to focus and try to drill down to the things we think have a realistic chance of getting absorbed into a reauthorization. I'm not going to say that there's not a stretch there on a few of these, but certainly, after having some blue sky brainstorming sessions with our members, with council members and other stakeholder groups about what we'd like to see in an ideal world, based on feedback we got from members' offices and from committee staffers, we try to really nail down a short list of kind of critical priorities that we would like to see. So that includes the reauthorization of existing rail programs, extend dedicated funding at current levels, including advanced appropriations. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. We also identified direct distribution of rail funds to states to kind of build up that capacity. Now there's there's decent, I think, consensus among a lot of the big players that is necessary. There's a lot of disagreement about how big that program should be and whether it should be sunsetted at the end of the bill or whether we should try to seek to make it permanent. So I think there, reasonable folks can disagree, but, we ended up getting behind kind of the AASHTO version, but we do propose our own bill language in the long form version of this, which we include at the, ledge.resources page. Section 2 talks about implementing the FRA's daily long distance service study. We talked about the need to create a governance structure for that, the National Long Distance Rail Service Commission. We do have proposed language for that as well. And, we're really kind of looking at creating that federal working group, that federal entity that is capable of taking up that report and advancing the work. It wouldn't be able to, again, after having conversations with offices and committee staffers, We didn't go as big as maybe a lot of our members would like. I know that there are alternative proposals out there that call for, somewhere for billions of dollars dedicated to long distance network expansion. We just said, let's get a governance structure in there and then make them eligible for discretionary grants. And so I think that'll be part of the conversation, but it certainly was something we'd heard back that there was a lot of skepticism among the GOP members, outside of maybe Senator Sheehy's office, about really dramatically plussing up long distance expansion, um, in the absence of, again, any real clear governance structure. Section 3 is planning, construction, and procurement policy reforms. The big one is going to be streamline environmental review, assessments, and planning. Again, to get to Dan's question, I think there is huge interest in this, from both Republicans and Democrats, but what they mean by it, what they mean by environmental review reform, is dramatically different. And there are going to be some folks who are going to be really attached to the status quo, including some fairly powerful environmental groups who, I mean, powerful is maybe the wrong word, but they do have their constituency within the Democratic Party, which, narrows the math on what you're looking to find. So, for the Republicans, they have really focused on streamlining the permitting process for oil production, fracking, natural gas extraction. I think the Democrats are willing to accept a little bit of that, but they really want to, they're focusing more on streamlining electrical transmission line creation, and also, renewals. And we have seen some folks work with us on what streamlining might look like for passenger rail, which you can see a bullet point list. I won't read it there for you, but I encourage you to look at it, and we'll talk more about that in person in DC. We also identified the creation of a national equipment leasing pool. After hearing feedback from a number of offices, we moved away from, the establishment of a new corporation and instead focused on a working group led by states. Um, I think it has its drawbacks, but again, this is if politics is, I think we're looking at the art of the possible here. And this was our read for it. Our read of the situation of the topography was that it would be better, um, would have a better chance of getting included in a final bill if it was a state-led process. So that's the language that we end up creating. And I think even, some of the equipment industry might be working on an even more decentralized approach around, tax incentive structures for domestic manufacturers. So, we're waiting to hear that proposal, but there hasn't been a lot that has been introduced publicly. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. That was a big information dump. But I see the chat section's kind of going off, so I wanted to see if we can go. John McIntosh, what funds are obligated going forward? That's a big, kind of broad, general question that I'm not sure I understand. That's right, up with an obligation updates, but we haven't gotten one in a while.
No, what I meant was what funds have been obligated by Congress that can be spent in relation to your graph. you showed a graph that showed deployment of funds over multiple fiscal years. And I don't know whether that was funded or obligated under the previous IILJ or Act, or if that was what is being requested in future fiscal years.
Let me see if I can go find that screen again. Is this what the one you're talking about?
Yes.
So that is a slide from Amtrak's FY26 legislative grant request. And my understanding is that is their um, planned, that's their capital program for spending the IIJA advanced appropriations money. Plus whatever and they update it based on whatever they receive through the annual appropriations process, which hasn't been much in excess um, of advanced appropriations. So that is mostly just IIJA funding, and that's why the drawdown kind of starts to begin in FY27, rather. Just double check.
So that money can be contracted for new equipment, and that money is obligated. And Congress cannot, come back later and say, well, we don't want to appropriate that level going forward and do a clawback or anything like that. I suppose they could, but it's unlikely.
Um, I'd say yes and yes. I mean, so there could be a clawback. Um, to what degree, I do not know. There's not a lot of transparency around that. But I think that we have seen some very positive indications from the US DOT that they understand the needs of Amtrak. They understand why this money should be spent and how it is being spent. They've obviously had a number of very public disagreements with Amtrak leadership over implementation strategy, and some of that has resulted in, the firing of Stephen Gardner as president. Some of that has, and that may not have been. Well, I won't fall down that rabbit hole. Some of it has had to do with, seizing Washington Union Station from Amtrak and taking that under the umbrella of the US DOT. They've done the same thing with, Texas High-Speed Rail, and kind of said, Amtrak, you're done with that, but we do want to see a greater role for Amtrak in Penn Station. Obviously, the loan distance equipment, putting that back out for bid through a new RFP, RFQ process. That was, I think, FRA initiated. So they're definitely having their say, but they do not seem interested in clawing back the money like they did with California High-Speed Rail, for instance. And I will also say that California High-Speed Rail money that was clawed back is scheduled to be redistributed through a new round of FSP grant applications.
Thank you.
Kevin Jones, does RPA share the one pagers with members of Congress independent of our Day on the Hill activities? Yes, we do. If the IIJ reauthorization is delayed, will that affect FY27 appropriations? Likewise, so they're not going to reauthorize IIJA. They will do a new program, and it's going to be a program led by, the Republican committee chairs. So they're going to have a different set of priorities. Hopefully, a lot of the existing programs will get extended. But certainly, I think probably you would I would recommend moving away from that terminology during our congressional meetings. It won't affect FY27 appropriations. There are many times where appropriators have moved ahead in the absence of an authorizing structure, so I think they're comfortable doing that, and I think they will probably feel very comfortable doing that this year. So we shall see. But you have a further question. Does the authorization appropriations process have to restart due to different Amtrak structure? No, it does not. And that's going to be we're going to try to tackle that in person, Chris, the Amtrak restructuring conversation. But right now there's more known unknowns than known knowns. So to paraphrase Don Rumsfeld. Kim asked, for long distance corridors, where is the best opening now? Appropriations, Chrissy, or reauthorization? I think we have to walk and chew gum. I think we all know the equipment challenges that exist for the national network, for the network writ large, frankly. And so I don't think we can view the IIJA as a one-off investment in, recapitalizing Amtrak. I think if you look at successful rail programs in other countries, it's continual investment. And so we ought to push back against the idea that that was a once in a generation investment. But we also have to keep the lights on. So that's important too. And that's, eventually I would like us to get to a point where we can get some predictable dedicated funding for Amtrak so that we don't have to fight that existential battle every year, but it's not where we are yet. Chrissy is going to be again the vehicle for earmarks. So if you have a friendly senator and if you have like a very discrete project that is under a few $1 million, that's going to be a really good opportunity to see if you can get congressionally directed spending and kind of cut through some of the whole grant application process that really does tend to draw it out. Kim also said S2916 is now S3728. Okay.
Yeah, the bill number changed, Sean. Sorry. He introduced it in September. Then when he and Merkley kind of reintroduced it, it changed to 3728.
All right. Thank you. I was on Congress.gov, but I guess I must have been looking at the out-of-date bill. So I appreciate that. And that's that would have been embarrassing. All right. We'll update that before we put the one pager live tomorrow. Meredith, Section 3 got a lot of interest at last year's Day on the Hill. New ideas welcome for saving time and money on passenger rail and projects planning, construction, and implementation, making most of all capital investments. 100%, 100%. So I'm hopeful that some version of that is going to be included in the final bill. We just need to make sure it includes improvements for passenger rail programs, and that it's not limited to, pipelines and drilling. So again, we are working with a couple other stakeholder groups. There has been delays in getting the language finalized. There's a lot of tripwires in among the stakeholder groups. So it's been tough to kind of get consensus on that final language. We have some rough proposals about, establishing shot clocks and saying that, if the FRA hasn't approved something in, I think it's 24 months, then, they have the ability to just move ahead by right. So I think there's some good proposals in there, and I hope to have actual bill language very shortly. John says Section 3 will be resisted. Apply the waivers to existing corridors. There is going to be some definite opposition to permitting reform. Again, I think from environmental groups in a lot of parts of the country. So it's going to be a tough one. Dean said one of my senators, Senator Warnock, may be an example of a Democrat for permitting reform for rail. And then he links to it. So thanks for sharing. Dan says, I have some ideas about permitting reform and finding common ground. Let's catch up next week, Sean. Okay, I'll follow up with you. Jim Webster said 60 minutes on 4 or 5 had a say. Okay, yep, they did. All right, there's kind of a back and forth here. Tom said, so I'm a new member here, and sitting in this hour has been quite humbling, and realizing there's so much I have to learn and get up to speed. After the one pagers, what are the next best resources that I can understand more of pretty much everything talked about this evening? Man, it's a big question. It's a big question. It's these are things that just take time. And I certainly will, we try to keep people up to date through the hotline. There are some white papers I can share. And so perhaps, as we think about a lot of what we focus on is coming up with like the 101 to get people kind of up to speed, conversant. So I'm going to work with Joe and John Christoph, who's really kind of likes to dig into this too, about how we can maybe come up with a 401 version of that, for those looking to take the next step. I will say, I do think our long form surface transportation proposal, which is on the legislative resources page, is a good kind of next step to take, because it does provide a little bit of extra narrative and some specific bullet point proposals of what we're trying to check in on, and the change we're trying to affect. So I definitely think, oh yeah, I was thinking Tom's not new. Okay. So yeah, check that out, and hopefully Joe can link to that if he hasn't already. Stu asked, what is the potential environmental upside of shortening the NEPA process? Get more damn trains. That's very concise. I think the current permitting process really favors the status quo, which is very highway centric. And so if we're gonna ever build passenger rail and electrified passenger rail in particular quickly, in a meaningful time frame, we're going to have to address some of and I think going back, Jim Webster talked about the 60 minutes segment. I haven't seen that full segment, so I don't know if they get into it. I don't know how fair and balanced that is, but if you look at California high-speed rail project, environmental permitting has been a huge obstacle to success in getting that train up and running. And so, I think if we want to bring high-speed rail to the US, we're going to have to address some of that status quo bias that exists. All right. Peter Cole asked, will we get copies to share with the legislators at the in-house meeting? Yes, we will. And you can print your own if you have a printer, but we will try to provide enough copies. I'll just go in and say that we'll provide enough copies, and we have the printer there. So if we're short, we can always print off more. We're also, I know there are some state specific sheets that we will be trying to provide as well, upon request. and we will hear from the Rail Supply Institute's Matt Delaney, and they have come up with some really great state econ benefits sheets that we'll link to in future missives. And also, I think we will link to it on our legislative resources page now that I remind myself. So look for those. All right. It is 8:10, or 8:07, almost 8:10. So I think my voice is giving out. I'm going to call it there. We will have, let me see. One more round of webinars next week. There's going to be one at 7 p.m. Eastern on Monday, April 13th, one at 7 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday, April 14th, where we'll just go provide an update on the agenda for the days in the office. Also, hopefully the Wednesday council business meeting. Go over last minute logistics, but also, field any questions you all have. And so I'm hoping it's going to be something akin to office hours. We'll see. We'll see if we have the level of attendance we have there. I'll also say, if you have specific questions, you don't need to wait till those webinars. You all should have my contact information as well as Joe Aiello's contact information. Joe is here to help you with any meeting scheduling problems you have. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And yeah, that's the information. And then there's my email address. So I'll stop there. And just, again, thank you for taking your time this evening. I know this has been a kind of a hectic schedule of webinars over the last 3 weeks, and we got 2 weeks more to go. So we appreciate your dedication and your energy and your effort. And we look forward to seeing you next week, answering any questions you have in the meantime, and seeing you all in DC in 2 weeks. Everyone enjoy their evening.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.